In the dead of a Willowbrook winter, a perfect 7-foot snowman appears overnight on the village green bowler hat tilted, carrot nose precise, no footprints leading away. Children marvel. Gossips whisper. Then, as the thaw creeps in, a child's scream shatters the frost. A frozen hand juts from the snowman's chest, pearls glinting on a lifeless wrist. Beneath the innocent facade lies Mrs. Sylvia Dane poisoned with arsenic-laced tea, stabbed through the heart, and packed into the snow like a gruesome secret. Was it her jealous husband? A brooding artist-lover? Or the mild vicar whose embezzled church funds she threatened to expose? As Miss Marple unravels alibis thread by thread sawdust trails, planted pearls, a top hat from the pub's lost and found, the village's darkest hearts melt faster than the snow. One confession, one gunshot, and a spinster's silent sacrifice later, the truth stands bare. Love and fear can build a monster far colder than ice. In 30 seconds of frost and fire, a snowman buries a murder, and Miss Marple digs it up. Chapter 1. The Frosty Arrival. Snow had fallen without cease for 3 days, wrapping the village of Willowbrook in a hush so complete that even the church clock seemed to strike with reluctance. From the tall windows of Willowbrook Manor, the view was a Christmas card come to life. Roofs sugared white, the frozen pond a looking-glass, and the village green transformed into a smooth, unmarked page upon which the children of the parish were scribbling their temporary histories in sledges and snowballs. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the window alcove with a half-finished piece of knitting in her lap, observed the scene with the mild interest of one who has seen many winters and found each to be subtly different from the last. She had arrived at the manor only the evening before, summoned by a telegram from her old friend Colonel Bantry, Dolly in a fret about Christmas come and steady her. The colonel himself was at that moment tramping across the terrace in search of a misplaced pipe, leaving Miss Marple to the agreeable solitude of the drawing-room fire. It was 10:15 when young Tommy Briggs, scarlet-cheeked and breathless, burst into the hall, crying that something extraordinary had appeared upon the green. The housemaids, always ready for diversion, pressed their faces to the window. Even the stately butler, Pawk, allowed himself a glance. Miss Marple laid aside her needles. On the green stood a snowman. Now snowmen were no novelty in Willowbrook. Every garden boasted at least one lopsided specimen, but this was different. It rose a full 7 feet, perfectly proportioned, its surface packed so hard that it gleamed like marble. A black bowler hat slightly dented, as though it had seen better decades, perched at a rakish angle above a carrot nose of surgical straightness. 2 chips of coal served for eyes, yet they contrived to look knowing, almost amused. One arm was extended in a gesture that might have been greeting or warning. The other rested lightly against the waistcoat of packed snow, as though the figure were about to produce a card from an invisible pocket. "Somebody has been up the entire night," murmured Dolly Bantry, sailing into the room in a rustle of violet wool. "Pawk says the thing was not there at dusk." And no footprints leading away, only a single set coming from the direction of the mill. Miss Marple inclined her head. "A single set, you say? That is interesting." Colonel Bantry stumped in, redder than usual. "Artist fellow, Harmon, I'll wager. Lives down by the old mill-queer fish, paints nothing but storms and shipwrecks. Probably thinks himself clever. Artists," said Miss Marple mildly, "are often clever, but seldom so punctual." By noon the entire village knew of the snowman. Mrs. Price, emerging from the post office with her lips pursed like a drawn string, declared it a work of genius. The schoolmistress, Miss Ellis, shepherded her pupils round it at a safe distance, warning them not to touch. Old Mr. Badger, who had fought at Balaclava and remembered snow deeper than any child could imagine, pronounced the figure cocky and tapped it smartly with his stick. The snowman did not flinch. Miss Marple, wrapped in a sensible tweed coat and a scarf of her own knitting, took her usual afternoon walk. She moved slowly, for the pavement was treacherous, yet her eyes missed nothing. She noted the single line of footprints broad, purposeful, the tread of a man's shooting boot emerging from the alley beside the mill and halting precisely where the snowman now stood. She observed that the bowler hat carried a faint band of darker silk inside the brim. A mourning band, perhaps, or merely the relic of some long-forgotten owner. She saw, too, that the carrot had been inserted with such care that not a flake of snow had fallen from the aperture. Most curious of all was a faint discoloration low down on the snowman's left side, a pale rose stain, no larger than a sixpence, half hidden by the fold of the snowy waistcoat. Miss Marple bent closer. The stain had the look of something that had seeped outward and then frozen. She straightened, her breath a small cloud in the icy air, and tucked the observation away as neatly as a stitch in her knitting. At the Red Lion that evening, the snowman was the sole topic. The bar parlor glowed with lamplight and the scent of mulled ale. Dr. Haydock, warming his hands at the fire, declared that the thing must have taken 4 hours at least, working in the dark. Mr. Clement, the vicar, suggested charitably that it was a gift to the children. Miss Hartnell, bristling with certainty, announced that gifts which appeared overnight were seldom innocent. "Mark my words," she said, tapping her umbrella on the floor. "There is mischief in it." Miss Marple, seated in the chimney corner with a glass of hot water and lemon, listened and said little. She was remembering a winter long ago when a snowman built by the boys of the grammar school had concealed, for the space of a single afternoon, the headmaster's lost watch. Children, she reflected, are natural conspirators. Adults merely more practiced ones. When she left the inn, the moon had risen, laying a silver wash over the village. The snowman stood alone on the green, the bowler hat casting a crescent shadow across its face. Miss Marple paused beneath the lych gate. For an instant the figure seemed to lean forward, as though sharing a confidence. Then the wind stirred, the branches of the yew tree creaked, and the moment passed. She walked on, her button boots crunching softly. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked once and was still. Secrets, thought Miss Marple, are rather like seeds. They lie quiet under the snow, waiting for the thaw. And in Willowbrook the thaw, when it came, would be sudden. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Inn. The Red Lion Inn stood at the corner where the high street curved like a shepherd's crook, its sign creaking gently in the night wind. Snow lay thick upon the slate roof, and the windows glowed amber, throwing long rectangles of light across the trampled path. Within, the air was dense with pipe smoke, the tang of ale, and the particular warmth that gathers when villagers congregate to dissect a novelty. Miss Marple entered quietly, shaking a few flakes from her scarf. The tap-room was full, yet conversation hushed the moment she appeared, an old courtesy, half respect, half curiosity. She inclined her head to the company and took the small chair nearest the inglenook, where the fire crackled with apple wood and the bellows lay idle. Landlord Higgs himself brought her hot water with a slice of lemon, refusing payment with a gruff, "Guests of the manor, drink on the house, miss." The snowman dominated every tongue. Dr. Haydock, coat unbuttoned and waistcoat straining, held court beside the hearth. He had measured the figure that afternoon with a pocket tape and pronounced it 6 feet 11 inches from base to crown of bowler. Allowing for settlement, he said, the builder began with a core at least 5 feet high. Packed it tighter than a Christmas pudding. Took strength, I tell you. Strength and time, amended Miss Hartnell, who sat opposite with her umbrella across her knees like a cavalry saber. Honest folk were abed by 11. Whoever did it was abroad after midnight. Young Mr. Pawk-nephew to the manor butler, and therefore privy to superior gossip, leaned over from the settle. I saw lights at the mill cottage past 1 o'clock. Mr. Harmon's window, plain as day. A murmur rippled round the room. Mr. Harmon, the artist, had arrived in Willowbrook the previous May, renting the disused mill with its wheel frozen solid and its loft full of bats. He painted violent seascapes which the London dealers snapped up, and he spoke to no one unless spoken to twice. His presence had unsettled the village, the way a single black rook unsettles a dovecote. Mr. Clement, the vicar, raised a pacific hand. We must not judge hastily. A man may work late upon his canvases without sinister intent. Canvas be hanged, retorted Miss Hartnell. He was seen carrying something bulky, wrapped in sacking. Tommy Briggs told my maid, and my maid told me. Tommy Briggs himself, perched on a stool with a glass of ginger beer, swelled with importance. It were near 2 in the morning, miss. I'd been to fetch Dr. Haydock from mother's cough. Mr. Harmon come up the mill path with a bundle over his shoulder big as a bolsters. Went straight to the green. Dr. Haydock nodded confirmation. Boy woke me at 1:40. I looked at the clock. Miss Marple sipped her lemon water and listened. She had a way of listening that suggested she already knew the shape of the story, and merely waited for the details to catch up. Her eyes, pale blue and deceptively mild, moved from face to face, noting the flicker of excitement in Mrs. Price, the postmistress, the faint uneasiness in Mr. Clement's smile, the way landlord Higgs polished the same glass over and over. Colonel Bantry's voice boomed suddenly. From the doorway, he had stumped down from the manor for a nightcap. Harmon's a queer card, right enough, but murder? Dash it, the man paints storms, not people. Storms can drown a soul, said Miss Hartnell darkly. The door opened again, admitting a gust of frost, and Mr. Reginald Dane, landowner, magistrate, and the richest man in the parish. He was tall, florid, dressed in a caped overcoat that made him resemble an indignant seal. Conversation faltered. Mr. Dane was not a regular at the Red Lion. Evening, he said curtly. My wife's pearls are missing. Anyone seen them? A ripple of surprise. Mrs. Dane's pearls, 3 strands, perfectly matched, were famous. She had worn them to the hunt ball, only a fortnight ago. Missing since when? Asked Dr. Haydock. Since yesterday afternoon. She went to the vicarage for the flower roster, then to call on Mrs. Swettenham. Never came home to dress for dinner. I thought she was staying in town with her aunt. Telegram came this morning. Her aunt never set eyes on her. Mr. Clement looked distressed. She was here, certainly. Took tea in the study. Left at 4:30, saying she must hurry to the mill to sit for Mr. Harmon. Another stir. Mrs. Dane had sat for Harmon several times. The village pretended not to notice the lengthening sessions. Miss Marple set her glass down. Did Mrs. Dane mention the Snowman? The vicar blinked. Why, yes. She laughed about it. Said it looked like a policeman on point duty, and she'd bring Harmon to see it after dark. Mr. Dane's face darkened. After dark? With that fellow? Landlord Higgs cleared his throat. Begging your pardon, sir, but Mrs. Dane left the inn here at 6, ordered a glass of sherry, said she'd walk to the mill. Snow was starting then. Never reached it, far as we know. Miss Marple's needles began to click softly. She had produced her knitting from nowhere, as elderly ladies do. And the pearls? In the safe at the hall, said Mr. Dane. She fetched them yesterday morning to have the clasp mended. Jeweler returned them by post-chaise at 3. She wore them to the vicarage. Tommy Briggs piped up. I seen a glint inside the Snowman, morning after it appeared. Like pearls, it were, deep in the chest. Silence fell, thick as the snow outside. Dr. Haydock broke it. Nonsense. Reflection off the ice. But Miss Marple's gaze had sharpened. She remembered the rose stain low on the Snowman's side, the precise carat, the single set of footprints. She remembered, too, a case in another village where a lady's diamonds had been concealed inside a plaster bust until the artist could spirit them away. Snow, she reflected, was an admirable temporary safe. Colonel Bantry drained his tankard. Better informed Craddock at County. Can't have wives vanishing. Mr. Dane drew himself up. I'll telephone from the manor. No need for panic. Yet panic was already abroad. Gladys, parlour-maid at the hall, had slipped in to whisper that Mrs. Dane's fur coat was missing from the cloakroom, but her galoshes remained neatly side by side. Mrs. Price recalled posting a letter from Mrs. Dane to a London address care of a solicitor, heavily sealed. Miss Hartnell declared that Mrs. Dane had quarreled with her husband over money only last week. The walls at the hall were thin. Miss Marple rose. "If you will excuse me, I think I shall take a turn round the green before bed. The air is bracing." Colonel Bantry protested, but she was already winding her scarf. Outside, the moon rode high, turning the snow to mother of pearl. The snowman stood sentinel, its bowler hat casting a rakish shadow. Miss Marple approached slowly, her boots leaving delicate prints beside the corduroy marks of the village boys. She studied the figure anew. The rose stain had spread slightly, feathering into the surrounding snow like diluted watercolor. She bent, gloved fingers brushing the surface. Cold, unyielding yet beneath the packed exterior, she sensed a subtle give, as though the core were not entirely snow. She straightened, eyes thoughtful. From the shadow of the lich gate came a slight sound, a stifled cough. Miss Marple turned. A figure detached itself from the darkness. Mr. Harmon, collar turned up, sketchbook beneath his arm. "Miss Marple," he said, voice low, "I saw your lamp from the mill. I had to see it again." "The snowman?" He nodded. "It's wrong. I didn't build it. Someone used my boot prints deliberately." Miss Marple regarded him steadily. "You were abroad last night?" "Painting. The storm light on the snow, I worked till dawn, but I passed the green at 3. It wasn't there then. Yet your footprints lead to it." "I know." His voice cracked. "Someone wore my boots from the porch. I found snow on the mat this morning." Miss Marple considered. Artists were theatrical. Still, the fear in his eyes seemed genuine. "And Mrs. Dane?" "She never reached the mill. I waited till 7, then walked to the hall. Mr. Dane said she was in town." A sudden scream shattered the quiet high childish, coming from the inn yard. Miss Marple and Harmon ran. Tommy Briggs stumbled out, white-faced, pointing back toward the green. "It moved," he gasped. "The snowman, its arm fell off, and there's a hand inside." Lanterns flared. Villagers poured from the Red Lion. Dr. Haydock pushed forward, Colonel Bantry bellowing for calm. In the yellow circle of light, the snowman stood askew, one arm detached and lying like a fallen branch. From the cavity protruded a human hand small, gloved in gray kid, rigid with frost. Miss Marple stepped closer. On the frozen wrist gleamed a narrow bracelet gold, set with a single pearl. She recognized it. Mrs. Dane had worn it to the vicarage tea. The whispers in the inn had become a roar, but Miss Marple heard only the wind sifting snow from the yew branches like sifted flour. Secrets, she thought, were melting faster than the thaw. Chapter 3. The thaw begins. The morning broke with a pale, reluctant sun that turned the snowfields to tarnished silver. Willowbrook lay stunned, as though the village itself had been struck senseless. The green was roped off with clothesline and garden twine. 2 young constables from the county station stamped their feet and blew on their fingers, while Sergeant Pollitt Round read, and officious stood guard over the snowman like a terrier at a rat hole. A canvas tent had been erected overnight. Within, the police surgeon and Dr. Haydock worked by the light of hurricane lamps, their breath hanging in clouds. Miss Marple, invited by Colonel Bantry's peremptory note to the inquest, come at once. Jane Dowley in hysterics, arrived at the manor at 9:30. The hall was already crowded. Mr. Reginald Dane sat in the great chair by the fire, face mottled with grief and brandy. Mr. Harmon, summoned from the mill, stood apart, coat unbuttoned, eyes fixed on the carpet. Mr. Clement fluttered like a distressed blackbird. Miss Hartnell, rigid in bombazine, kept murmuring, "Shocking, shocking," to anyone who would listen. Gladys, the parlor-maid, hovered with sal volatile and burnt feathers. Inspector Craddock Tall, lean, with the air of a man who has seen too many corpses in inconvenient places, addressed the room from the hearthrug. "Mrs. Sylvia Dane," he said, "died between 6 o'clock yesterday evening and 3 this morning. Cause of death: a single stab wound to the heart. The blade entered beneath the left breast and pierced the aorta. Death would have been almost instantaneous. Prior to the stabbing, she had taken arsenic enough to cause nausea and collapse, but not sufficient to kill outright. A collective intake of breath. Mr. Dane half rose, then sank back. "Arsenic?" he whispered. "But Sylvia never—" "Trace quantities were found in the dregs of a teacup recovered from the vicarage study," Craddock continued. "The cup had been rinsed, but not thoroughly. We are analyzing the contents now." Mr. Clement went the color of putty. "Tea? But I poured it myself Indian. 2 lumps. Mrs. Dane always took 2 lumps. "Precisely," said Craddock. "The sugar bowl on the tray contained arsenic mixed with the sugar. A crude but effective method." Miss Marple, seated beside Dolly Bantry on the sofa, noted the vicar's trembling hands. She noted, too, that Mr. Harmon's gaze had flicked swift as a lizard's tongue toward the French windows, where the snow lay unmarked, save for the prints of the constables. "The body," Craddock went on, "was conveyed to the village green sometime after 10 o'clock. The Snowman was constructed around it. The outer layer is hard-packed. The inner core is looser, mixed with sawdust from the mill loft Mr. Harmon's sawdust, according to the miller. The bowler hat belongs to the Red Lion lost property cupboard. The carrot came from Mrs. Price's vegetable rack. The murder weapon, a steel paper knife with an ivory handle, was found buried 6 inches beneath the Snowman's base. It bears no fingerprints." Colonel Bantry cleared his throat. "Motive? Several possibilities. Mrs. Dane's pearl necklace value, approximately £2,000, has not been recovered. Her bracelet was on the wrist. Robbery, perhaps. Or jealousy rumors of an attachment between the deceased and Mr. Harmon. Or domestic discord. Mr. Dane admits to quarreling with his wife over expenditure." Mr. Dane surged to his feet. "I loved her. Yes, we quarreled. She spent money like water. But murder? Never." Craddock raised a placatory hand. "No one is accused yet. We are tracing Mrs. Dane's movements. She left the vicarage at 4:30, intending to walk to the mill. She was seen entering the Red Lion at 6 for a glass of sherry. After that, nothing. No footprints lead from the inn to the mill. The snow was already deep. Someone met her, persuaded her to the green, poisoned her, stabbed her, and built the Snowman to conceal the crime until spring." Dr. Haydock, entering with snow on his boots, added, "Rigor is advanced. Body temperature suggests death nearer 11 and 6. The arsenic would have taken effect within the hour." Miss Marple spoke for the first time, voice soft. "The paper knife, Inspector, was it from the hall?" Craddock hesitated. "No. The blade matches a set in the vicarage study. Mr. Clement's paper knife is missing." The vicar gave a small, broken sound. Outside, the tent flap lifted. A constable emerged, carrying a bundle wrapped in sacking. He laid it on the terrace table and unwrapped it. Mrs. Dane's fur coat, stiff with frost. A dark stain spreading across the left side like a map of some unknown continent. Gladys screamed and dropped the sal volatile. Miss Marple rose. "May I see the coat, Inspector?" Craddock nodded. She examined the stain-dried blood, certainly then turned back the collar. Inside, caught in the fur, was a single pearl, loose as though torn from its string. "Mrs. Dane's pearls were fastened with a safety clasp," she murmured. "Yet one is here. Curious." Mr. Harmon stepped forward, voice hoarse. "She was wearing the necklace when she left the inn. I saw it at a distance, through the window." She waved. Craddock's eyes narrowed. "You were watching her?" "I was sketching the inn sign. The snow on the lion's mane, artistic interest only." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the French windows again. The snow beyond was drifted high against the glass. Yet in one pane, low down, was a small, perfect circle where the frost had been rubbed away, as though someone had pressed a warm coin to the pane and peered through. She moved to the window, opened it, stepped onto the terrace. The constable's prints led to the tent and back. But beneath the window, half hidden by the drift, was another set smaller, heeled, leading toward the shrubbery. They stopped abruptly where the yew hedge cast its shadow. Miss Marple stooped. At the end of the final print lay a scrap of silk-pale rose, torn, the edge stiffened with something darker. She slipped it into her glove. Inside, Craddock was questioning Gladys. The girl was trembling. "Yes, sir. Madam took the pearls from the safe yesterday. Said Mr. Goldsmith had mended the clasp. She wore them to the vicarage. I helped her with her coat at 6. She was laughing, said she'd be late. Mr. Harmon was expecting her." "And the arsenic in the hall?" Gladys shook her head violently. "Cook keeps rat poison in the shed, never in the house." Miss Hartnell sniffed. "Someone carried it. Sugar doesn't poison itself." Colonel Bantry offered Miss Marple a chair. "Devilish business, Jane. Who'd have thought our quiet Willowbrook—" "Quiet villages," said Miss Marple, "are like ponds, still on the surface, busy beneath." Craddock turned to Harmon. "You admit the sawdust is yours?" "Freely. I use it to pack canvases. Anyone could have taken a handful." "And the footprints in your boots?" Harmon spread his hands. "As I told Miss Marple, someone borrowed them from the porch. I was painting all night." The door was unlatched. The inspector made a note. "We'll test the boots for blood." Miss Marple returned to the sofa. Dolly Bantry clutched her arm. "Jane, do you think it's the artist?" "He has such wild eyes." "Eyes can be misleading," said Miss Marple. "I am reminded of a gardener in another village who looked positively murderous, yet wouldn't tread on a worm. Whereas the mildest curate—" She broke off as the door opened to admit Sergeant Pollitt, triumphant. "Found something, sir." He held up a small bottle, half full of white powder. "Under the lining of the fur coat pocket. Label's rubbed off, but it's arsenic right enough." Mr. Dane stared as though turned to stone. "Sylvia carrying poison?" Craddock took the bottle, sniffed, touched a grain to his tongue. "Bitter. Yes. Enough here for a dozen doses." Miss Marple's needles clicked once, twice. She was thinking of the rose silk in her glove, the circle in the frosted pane, the single pearl. She was thinking of tea at the vicarage, and sugar bowls, and the precise way the carrot had been inserted into the snowman's face. Outside, the sun climbed higher, striking sparks from the icicles along the eaves. The thaw, she reflected, had indeed begun, and with it, the slow, inexorable melting of alibis. Chapter 4. Threads of deception. The afternoon was raw, the sky the color of wet slate. Snow still clung to the hedges, but the roads had turned to slush, and every cartwheel flung up a brown spray. Miss Marple, fortified by a cup of strong tea and Dolly Bantry's anxious solicitude, set out for the mill cottage. She wore her stoutest boots and carried a large golfing umbrella, more for prodding the ground than for shelter. The mill lay half a mile beyond the church, where the stream, now iron-hard, curved like a scythe. Smoke rose thinly from the single chimney. The great wheel was motionless, its paddles sheathed in ice. Miss Marple knocked with the ferrule of her umbrella. After a pause, the door opened a cautious inch, and wider. Mr. Harmon stood on the threshold, unshaven, a smear of vermilion on his cheek. "Miss Marple, I suppose the police would send someone." "I am not the police," she said mildly. "May I come in?" He stood aside. The cottage was one large room, the upper floor reached by a ladder. A stove glowed in the corner. Canvases leaned 3 deep against the walls. The air smelled of turpentine, coffee, and damp stone. A half-finished portrait of Mrs. Dane stood on an easel head turned, pearls agleam, the eyes already holding that secret amusement which had so irritated the village. Harmon followed her gaze. I began it yesterday morning. She was to sit again at 6. Miss Marple studied the canvas. The brushwork was bold, almost violent, yet the likeness was uncanny. You have caught her exactly. The tilt of the chin quite characteristic. He poured coffee into 2 thick cups. I keep country hours. Milk is off, I'm afraid. Black will do. She accepted the cup and seated herself on a wooden settle. Tell me about last night. Harmon paced. I worked until 3. The snow light on the water, I needed it for the background. I went out for air at 3:15. The green was empty. I returned here, slept till 8. The snowman was there when I looked out perfect, mocking. My boots were on the porch, caked with snow. I wear a 10. The prints were 10s. Miss Marple sipped. Someone knew your habits. Someone who wished me blamed. He stopped before the portrait. Sylvia laughed at the idea of hiding in a snowman. She said it would make a splendid joke on Reginald. Yet she carried arsenic in her pocket. His cup rattled in the saucer. I never saw it. Miss Marple set her coffee aside. The sawdust in the snowman's core came from your loft. Anyone could climb the outside stair. The door is never locked. He opened a cupboard. Sacks of sawdust lay within, one torn, the contents spilled. See? A handful missing. She bent to examine the floor. Footprints broad, like a man's crossed the boards to the ladder, then vanished upward. On the lowest rung clung a thread of rose silk. She detached it with a fingernail and tucked it into her glove beside its twin. May I see the loft? He hesitated, then shrugged. The ladder creaked beneath her slight weight. The loft was a chaos of stretchers, broken frames, rolls of canvas. In one corner stood an old sea chest. The lid was ajar. Miss Marple lifted it. Inside lay a woman's kid glove gray, the mate to the hand in the snowman, and a single pearl earring, the gold hook bent. Harmon stared. Those are Sylvia's. She lost the pair last month. Miss Marple closed the lid. Someone planted them. Downstairs again. She paused at the door. One more thing. The paper knife ivory handle, steel blade. You have one? He produced it from a drawer identical. I bought a set in Cairo. One is missing. I thought I'd mislaid it. Miss Marple thanked him and stepped into the cold. The path to the village was churned to mud. She kept to the verge, umbrella tapping. Halfway to the church, she met Gladys, red-nosed, carrying a basket. Miss, oh miss, it's dreadful. Mr. Danes locked himself in the gun-room and won't come out. Miss Marple patted the girl's arm. Courage, child. Tell cook to make strong coffee and leave it outside the door. Grief takes odd forms. Gladys sniffed. And the police took my best apron, said there was blood on the hem. But it's only beetroot stain, I swear. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. When did you last wear it? Yesterday morning, helping cook with the pickles. Then I hung it in the scullery. She continued to the vicarage, a low Georgian house with a monkey puzzle tree black against the sky. Mr. Clement opened the door himself, clerical collar askew. Miss Marple, forgive the disorder. The maids are distraught. He led her to the study. The tea tray still stood on the desk, 3 cups, a plate of Marie biscuits untouched. The sugar bowl was sealed with red tape. Inspector Craddock took samples, said the vicar. I cannot think how. Miss Marple lifted the lid. The sugar was coarse, crystallized. A faint grayish tint clung to some grains. She touched one to her tongue bitter. Arsenic is tasteless in small quantities, she murmured. But this is crude. Mr. Clement wrung his hands. I filled the bowl myself from the kitchen canister. Mrs. Dane helped herself 2 lumps always. Was anyone else in the room? Miss Hartnell looked in to borrow a hymn book. She took no tea. Miss Marple examined the cups. One bore a faint lipstick smudge coral pink, Mrs. Dane's shade. The second was clean. The third had a crumb of biscuit adhering to the rim. She moved to the window. The study overlooked the green. The snowman had been visible even yesterday. a white blob against the yew hedge. On the sill lay a brass telescope, Mr. Clement's bird-watching indulgence. "You observed the snowman from here?" The vicar flushed. I glanced out once or twice. Mrs. Dane remarked on it. Miss Marple raised the telescope. The green leapt into focus. The tent, the constables, the place where the snowman had stood. She lowered the glass thoughtfully. Back at the manor, Inspector Craddock awaited her in the library. Colonel Bantry was fortifying himself with whiskey. Dolly hovered with a hot water bottle. "Find anything, Miss Marple?" "A thread here, a pearl there," she said. "The coat pocket. How was the arsenic bottle inserted?" "After death, we think. The pocket was turned inside out, then restored. No blood on the bottle. Someone with cool nerves." She produced the rose silk. "From the mill loft and the manor terrace. Same weave Mrs. Dane's tea gown, I fancy." Craddock took it. "We searched the hall. No such gown. Perhaps it was cut up, or burned." She hesitated. "The paper knife, may I see it?" He produced it in a cardboard box. The blade was narrow, triangular, the handle yellowed ivory. A trace of brown discolored the junction. Blood? Human. Typo Mrs. Dane's. Miss Marple turned the knife. On the underside of the handle, almost invisible, was a tiny scratch, 3 parallel lines. "I have seen that mark before," she said slowly. "On a paper knife in a cathedral close. The verger's boy carved it to claim ownership." Craddock's brow creased. "Meaning?" "Meaning the knife was borrowed and returned would be too risky." Evening drew in. Lanterns bobbed along the high street. The Red Lion was full again. Miss Marple sat by the manor fire, knitting a balaclava in Air Force blue. Her mind moved like the needle's click, loop, pull through. Arsenic in the sugar domestic, familiar. The knife passionate, sudden. The snowman ingenious, theatrical. 3 minds are one. She remembered the telescope, the clean cup, the biscuit crumb. She remembered the bent earring hook, the sawdust, the boots on the porch. Colonel Bantry looked in. "Coming to dinner, Jane?" "In a moment." She snipped the wool. "Tell me, Arthur, does Mr. Clement keep rats in the vicarage cellar?" "Rats? Good Lord, no. Place is modern drains and all." "Then why the arsenic in the kitchen?" Bantry stared. "By Jove! You think—" "I think," said Miss Marple, rising, "that someone brought their own poison and their own knife, and perhaps their own accomplice." Outside, the temperature dropped. The slush began to harden again. Somewhere in Willowbrook, a church clock struck 6, clear and cold across the frost. Miss Marple drew her shawl closer. The threads were gathering, but the pattern was still obscured like a half-finished piece of knitting, waiting for the next row to reveal the design. Chapter 5. The Village Stirrings. Snow fell again in the night, soft and deliberate, as though the sky wished to hush the village into forgetfulness. By morning Willowbrook lay under a fresh coverlet, 6 inches deep, smooth as pulled cotton over the scars of yesterday. The police tent had been struck. Only a shallow depression and a ring of yellow tape marked the snowman's grave. Children were forbidden the green on pain of headmasterly wrath, yet their eyes strayed to it whenever they passed, half in dread, half in hope of further marvels. Miss Marple woke early. She had slept little. The balaclava lay finished on the counterpane, its stitches precise as a surgeon's. From her window she watched the milk cart struggle up the lane, the horse's breath pluming white. The world looked innocent again, but she knew better. Innocence, like fresh snow, conceals what lies beneath until the first boot prints betray it. At breakfast Dolly Bantry was fretful. "The servants are giving notice, Jane. Cook swears she heard footsteps in the attic. And Pock found the scullery window unlatched." "Footsteps and open windows," said Miss Marple, spreading marmalade with care, "are often less alarming than closed doors and silence." Colonel Bantry snorted over his kippers. "Craddock's got men at the mill again. Harmon's beside himself says they've taken his best brushes for blood tests. Brushes can be replaced, Miss Marple murmured. Reputations less easily. She spent the forenoon in the village. The post office was warm with gossip and the smell of sealing wax. Mrs. Price, lips tighter than ever, handed over a single letter addressed in violet ink. From London, she said significantly. Care of a solicitor. Mrs. Dane posted it Tuesday, special delivery. Miss Marple turned the envelope. The flap was sealed with a wafer. The address, Messrs. Bradley and Bradley, Lincoln's Inn, was written in a dashing feminine hand. She tucked it into her bag unopened. Evidence, she reflected, should reach the proper hands unmeddled. At the Red Lion she found Dr. Haydock nursing a half-pint and a headache. Autopsy's done, he said without greeting. Stomach contents, tea, biscuit crumbs, a trace of arsenic less than a grain. Enough to sicken, not to kill. The knife did the rest. Entered between the fourth and fifth ribs, upward slant. Killer was shorter than the victim or standing on lower ground. Mrs. Dane had been 5'7" in her stockings. Miss Marple filed the detail away. Any sign of struggle? None. She was facing her assailant, arms at her sides. The fur coat was buttoned to the throat. The knife went through sable and silk alike. One thrust clean. He drained his glass. Queerest thing, a smear of oil paint on the coat lining, cadmium yellow. Harmon's shade, according to the analysis. Miss Marple thanked him and continued to the churchyard. The snow lay in soft ridges over the graves. The yew trees dripped like weeping mourners. She found Tommy Briggs perched on the wall, catapult in pocket, cheeks scarlet. "Tommy," she said, "you told Miss Hartnell's maid about the glint inside the Snowman." The boy shuffled. "Yes, miss." Deep in the chest, it were, like a star. Before the hand appeared? Morning after it was built. Sun caught it just for a second. Could you reach it if you tried? He considered. Might, if I stood on Jimmy Pike's shoulders. Miss Marple rewarded him with a peppermint. And the footprints you saw, Mr. Harmon's boots, did they go round the Snowman, or only to it? Only to it, miss. Then stopped, like he'd been swallowed. She walked on, past the lich gate, to the vicarage. The front path had been swept. A neat pile of snow stood beside the door, like a miniature Alp. Mr. Clement was in the garden, scattering bread for the birds. His breath rose in small prayers. Miss Marple, forgive my not hearing the bell. The maids are at their prayers. A prudent household, she said. May I warm myself a moment? He led her to the study fire. The room had been tidied. The tea tray was gone, the sugar bowl replaced by a clean one. Yet the air still held a faint sweetness biscuit and something sharper. You have a new telescope, she observed. The brass instrument stood on its tripod, pointed toward the window. Mr. Clement flushed. The old one was returned to the Observatory Society. This is borrowed. She crossed to the window. The view was unchanged. The green, the place of the Snowman, the yew hedge. On the sill lay a single biscuit crumb, curled like a comma. You had visitors yesterday afternoon? Only Mrs. Dane and Miss Hartnell, briefly. Miss Hartnell took a biscuit. She refused tea, but accepted a Marie. She is partial to them. Miss Marple turned. The police took 3 cups. Yet only 2 people drank? The vicar's fingers worried his cassock button. I poured for myself, but did not drink. The shock, you understand. She nodded and moved to the desk. A leather-bound diary lay open. She glanced at the entry for the previous day. 4 p.m. Mrs. D. Flowers, 6.30 Compline. Between the lines, someone had penciled a tiny cross. A reminder? Mr. Clement closed the book. A private matter. Outside, the bells began for midday service. 3 clear notes, then silence. Miss Marple took her leave. The afternoon brought a thaw. Water dripped from eaves. The church roof shed its load in soft avalanches. At the hall, Mr. Dane had emerged from the gun room, hollow-eyed, to receive callers. Miss Marple found him in the drawing-room, amid the smell of hothouse lily and sealed envelopes. "I must arrange the funeral," he said dully. "But Craddock will not release." His voice broke. She sat opposite. "The pearls, Mr. Dane, were they insured?" "Fully. But Sylvia loved them. A wedding gift from my mother. Yet she carried arsenic in her pocket." He passed a hand over his eyes. "I cannot explain it. Unless blackmail, there were letters. She burned them last week. From Mr. Harmon? From someone?" She would not say. Miss Marple studied the fire. "Your wife quarreled with you on Tuesday?" "Over the London house. She wished to reopen it. I refused. We parted angrily. She said she would stay with her aunt." Gladys entered with a tray coffee, thin bread and butter. Her eyes were red. "Beg pardon, sir, but cook found this in the linen cupboard." She held out a scrap of rose silk, torn and stained. Mr. Dane stared. "Sylvia's tea gown. She wore it Tuesday morning." Miss Marple took the silk. The stain was dark, almost black in the folds. "Blood?" Gladys whimpered. "I don't know, miss. It wasn't there yesterday." Inspector Craddock arrived as they spoke, snow on his shoulders like epaulettes. "News," he said brusquely. "The arsenic in the vicarage sugar matches a tin found in the hall shed labeled rat poison, half empty. Fingerprints, Gladys's and the cook's." Gladys gasped. "We never touched the sugar." "Someone did," Craddock said. "And the paper knife traces of cadmium yellow on the handle, same as the coat lining." He turned to Miss Marple. "Harmon's paints. We're bringing him in." She rose. "Before you do, Inspector, may I suggest a small experiment? Ask Miss Hartnell to walk from the vicarage to the green in her outdoor shoes. The path is soft now. The prints will show." Craddock frowned but nodded to a constable. Evening closed in early, the sky a dull pewter. Miss Marple returned to the manor through the churchyard. The snow was melting fast. Gravestones emerged like islands. Beneath the yew she paused. A small heap of snow had been disturbed. Beneath it lay a single pearl, dulled with earth. She picked it up. The drill hole was clean, the nacre warm from the day's faint sun. Somewhere above, a rook cawed once and flew toward the mill. Back in her room she laid her finds on the dressing table. 2 scraps of rose silk, the pearl from the coat, the earring from the loft, the biscuit crumb, the pearl from the churchyard. She added the violet envelope, still unopened. The fire settled with a small sigh. Miss Marple sat, hands folded, eyes on the flames. She was thinking of sugar bowls and telescopes, of boots left conveniently on porches, of a woman who burned letters and carried poison in her pocket. She was thinking of a glint deep in a snowman's chest, and of a cross penciled lightly in a diary. Outside, the thaw continued. Water ran in the gutters like gossip. The snowman's grave filled slowly with brown slush. Somewhere in the village, a clock struck 7, then 8. Miss Marple rose, drew the curtains, and began to write a list in her neat, slanting hand. The stirrings, she reflected, were almost over. Soon the ground would be soft enough for the truth to push through, pale and persistent as the first snowdrop. Chapter 6. Unraveling the knot. The thaw had turned Willowbrook into a village of puddles and revelations. By noon the green was a quagmire. The snowman's site had collapsed into a muddy crater ringed with sodden tape. Children sailed paper boats in the ruts. The rooks wheeled overhead, cawing disapproval. Inspector Craddock's men had been at the mill since dawn, turning out canvases and turpentine tins with the thoroughness of terriers in a rabbit warren. Mr. Harmon sat in the county police car, coatless, wrists cuffed with the quiet dignity of a man who has decided protest is futile. Miss Marple watched from the manor terrace, shawl about her shoulders. Dolly Bantry hovered with a rug. "You'll catch your death, Jane. Come inside." In a moment, dear. Miss Marple's eyes were on the vicarage path, where Miss Hartnell was being escorted by a constable. The spinster's boots stout, square-toed, Lace to the ankle left, prints deep and unmistakable in the softened earth. The constable measured them against a plaster cast taken from the terrace shrubbery the night of the murder. Even at a distance, the match was playing. Colonel Bantry stumped up, pipe fuming. Craddock's got his man, by Jove. Harmon's paint on the knife, his sawdust in the corpse, his boots at the scene. Open and shut. Miss Marple turned the pearl from the churchyard between finger and thumb. Open, perhaps, but not, I think, shut. She descended to the library, where Craddock was laying exhibits on the baize table, the paper knife in its box, the arsenic bottle, the rose silk scraps, the kid glove, the bent earring. A constable added a fresh item, a woman's kid boot, the sole caked with mill sawdust. Found in Harmon's loft, Craddock said. Size 4. Mrs. Dane wore 4s. Miss Marple lifted the boot. The leather was cracked, the lace knotted in a double bow. Inside the tongue, in faded ink, was written S.D. Rome, 1928. Mrs. Dane's souvenir, she murmured. Yet the sawdust is fresh. Craddock's jaw tightened. He kept her things, obsessed. Or someone wished you to think so. She moved to the window. The crater on the green glistened. A constable was probing it with a stick. Something glinted. He stooped, lifted. The pearl necklace, dulled with mud, the safety clasp sprung open. Buried with the body after all, Craddock said grimly. Robbery motive collapses. Harmon killed her in a jealous rage, hid the pearls to fake theft. Miss Marple shook her head almost imperceptibly. The pearls were not in the Snowman when Tommy Briggs saw the glint. They were added later after the hand was revealed, when panic demanded a new deception. She opened her notebook. The list was brief. Arsenic vicarage sugar, knife vicarage set, sawdust mill loft boot Mrs. Dane's, planted pearls churchyard, and crater footprints Miss Hartnell's. Craddock followed her gaze. The spinster? She's 60 if she's a day. Strong as a pony, said Colonel Bantry. Carries the church banners, without help. Miss Marple closed the book. May I speak with Mr. Harmon before you charge him? Craddock hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. Interview room at the station. The room was bare, whitewashed, smelling of carbolic. Harmon sat at a deal table, hands linked. His eyes were red but steady. They found the necklace, he said. I never touched it. Miss Marple took the opposite chair. Tell me about the top hat. He blinked. From the Red Lion lost property. I saw it there weeks ago. Thought it would amuse Sylvia for the portrait. I meant to fetch it yesterday, but someone fetched it first. She leaned forward. Who knew you planned to elope? Only Sylvia. We were to meet in town, take the night train to Dover. She was leaving Reginald, had the tickets in her bag. Yet she carried arsenic. His face twisted. She feared him. Sighed he'd threatened poison if she ever left. She took the bottle from the shed to protect herself absurd, but she was frightened. Miss Marple considered. And the paper knife? I lent it to the vicar last month. He needed to cut pages in a new prayer book. Never returned it. She rose. Thank you, Mr. Harmon. Courage. Back at the manor, she found Mr. Clement in the drawing room, turning his hat in nervous fingers. Dolly had given him tea. The cup rattled in the saucer. Miss Marple, I must speak. The arsenic tin in the hall. Shed, it is mine. I brought it from the vicarage cellar last autumn. The drains were stopped. I meant to lay poison, then forgot. Someone must have remembered for you, she finished gently. Sit down, Mr. Clement. Tell me about the penciled cross in your diary. He sank into a chair. A reminder to visit old Mrs. Swetnam at 6:30. She is bedridden. I was late. Mrs. Dane kept me talking. When I reached the cottage at 7, Miss Hartnell was leaving. She said she had taken Mrs. Swetnam her library book. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. And the telescope? I lent it to Miss Hartnell. She wished to watch the comet. She thanked him and went to the telephone. 10 minutes later, Inspector Craddock joined her in the hall. Miss Hartnell's prints match the terrace and the path to the green. She admits walking there at 11 to view the snowman by moonlight, claims she saw nothing. Yet the hand was already visible, Miss Marple said. Tommy Briggs screamed at 10:40. She was seen leaving the inn at 10:30. She had 20 minutes. Craddock's face was grim. We'll bring her in. Evening brought frost again. The puddles glazed over like clouded mirrors. Miss Marple walked to the vicarage. Miss Hartnell was in the study, packing hymn books into a crate. Her face was composed, almost serene. Miss Marple, I supposed you would come. You helped build the snowman, Miss Marple said quietly. Miss Hartnell tied string with deliberate knots. I helped carry the body. He could not manage alone. He? Mr. Clement. The name fell into the room like a stone into still water. He came to me at 10 o'clock, distraught. Said she had accused him of embezzlement church funds for his sister's sanatorium. She threatened exposure unless he paid. He poisoned the sugar in panic, then stabbed her when she laughed at him. He begged me to help conceal the body until he could flee. She snipped the string. I loved him, you see. From the first day he came to Willowbrook. I thought if we hid her until spring, he could repay the money, resign quietly. The snowman was my idea childish, but effective. Miss Marple's voice was soft. And the pearls? I took them to make it seem robbery, buried them in the churchyard, and moved them to the crater when the hand was found. I wore her boot kept from the jumble sale. The sawdust, the paint child's play to plant in Harmon's loft. He was the perfect scapegoat. She lifted the crate. Will you tell the inspector? He is outside. Miss Hartnell looked toward the window. Frost ferns blurred the glass. Beyond, lanterns moved like fireflies. She set the crate down. Tell him I shall come quietly. And tell Mr. Clement, tell him I regret nothing. Miss Marple watched the constable lead her away, boots crunching on the frozen path. The study fire had burned low. A single biscuit crumb lay on the hearthrug like a full stop. She picked it up, turned it in her fingers. Human nature, she reflected, was a tapestry of fine threads, love, fear, loyalty, greed. Pull one, and the pattern shifted. Tonight the pattern was clear, though the colors were somber. Back at the manor, she found Harmon released, Coke restored, standing uncertainly in the hall. Craddock was telephoning the chief constable. Miss Marple offered her hand. You are free, Mr. Harmon. The elopement tickets keep them. Memory is safer than regret. He took her hand, eyes bright. You believed me. I believe the evidence, she corrected gently. It spoke louder than circumstance. Colonel Bantry poured whiskey. To Miss Marple, the unraveled knot. She accepted a thimbleful of sherry. Outside, the frost hardened. The stars came out sharp as pins. Somewhere in the village, a clock struck 9, then 10. The thaw was over. The ground was firm again. Tomorrow there would be arrests, statements, the slow machinery of justice. Tonight there was only the quiet tick of the grandfather clock and the knowledge that another knot, tightly tied by fear and devotion, had been patiently, inexorably undone. Chapter 7. The Revelation. The library at Willowbrook Manor had never seemed so cavernous. Although the fire roared and the chandeliers blazed, shadows clung to the coffered ceiling like cobwebs. Outside, a hard frost silvered the lawns. The moon, full and pitiless, turned every pane of glass into a mirror. They were all assembled in Inspector Craddock by the mantel, notebook in hand. Colonel Bantry in his accustomed chair, whiskey untouched. Dolly Bantry clutching a lace handkerchief as though it were a life-belt. Mr. Reginald Dane stood apart near the window, face averted, shoulders rigid. Mr. Harmon, coat still bearing the creases of custody, occupied the sofa's edge. Mr. Clement, death pale, sat between two constables as though already in the dock. Miss Hartnell, wrists lightly bound with tape, rather than steal Curdoc's concession to her age and sex, stood erect before the bookcases, eyes fixed on a morocco-bound set of sermons. Miss Marple entered last, closing the double doors with a soft click that sounded, in the hush, like the closing of a trap. She carried no notes, only the balaclava she had knitted, now folded into a neat square. She placed it on the table beside the exhibits, the paper knife, the arsenic bottle, the pearls cleaned of mud and gleaming with malevolent innocence, and took the small chair opposite Miss Hartnell. Inspector Craddock cleared his throat. Miss Marple has asked to address the room. I remind everyone that anything said may be used in evidence. Miss Marple inclined her head. I shall be brief. We have all heard confessions, partial and complete. Yet confession, like snow, can be molded into deceptive shapes. Let us examine the facts as they lie, stripped of ornament. She rose, moving to the table. First, the poison. Arsenic in the vicarage sugar bowl. The tin found in the hall shed belonged to Mr. Clement. He admits as much. But the sugar itself was coarse demerara, not the refined lumps Mrs. Dane preferred. Someone substituted the contents after 4 o'clock, when Mr. Clement filled the bowl from the kitchen canister of refined sugar. Who had access? Mr. Clement, Mrs. Dane herself, and Miss Hartnell, who entered briefly to borrow a hymn book. Miss Hartnell's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Second, a knife. Miss Marple lifted it by the cardboard tag. Ivory handle, steel blade, one of a set bought by Mr. Harmon in Cairo. He lent one to Mr. Clement to cut prayer book pages. The knife was returned, or so Mr. Clement believed, inside a stack of parish magazines. Yet the scratch marks on the handle are fresh. Someone wished us to trace it to the vicarage, not the mill. She laid it down. Third, the Snowman. Built after 10 o'clock, before 3. The core contained sawdust from Mr. Harmon's loft taken, he says, while he painted. The outer layer was packed hard, requiring strength and time. 2 people working in concert. One set of footprints Mr. Harmon's boots led to the site. But the boots were taken from his porch at 9:30, returned by 3, caked with snow. Miss Hartnell was seen leaving the Red Lion at 10:30. She walked to the vicarage, collected Mr. Clement, and together they carried the body wrapped in Mrs. Dane's fur coat from the vicarage side door to the green. The coat was later planted in the mill loft to incriminate Mr. Harmon. Colonel Bantry stirred. But the pearls were removed by Miss Hartnell to suggest robbery. She buried them first in the churchyard, Tommy Briggs's Glenfin. When the hand was discovered, transferred them to the crater to reinforce the theft motive. The single pearl in the coat fur was torn free during the struggle to wrap the body. Mr. Clement made a small animal sound. She laughed at me, he whispered. Said the church would pay for my sister's care, whether I embezzled or not. I put the arsenic in the sugar to silence her. When she took the first lump and smiled, I panicked. The knife was in my hand. Miss Hartnell's voice cut across, steady as a bell. He came to me at 10, covered in blood. I helped him because I loved him. I built the Snowman because I believed it would save him. I planted the evidence because I thought the artist deserved blame. He had taken her affection. After all, Miss Marple turned to her. You wore Mrs. Dane's old boot from the jumble sale to leave small prints. You smeared cadmium yellow on the coat lining from Mr. Harmon's palette. You rubbed the frost from the manor window to watch for searchers. But you overlooked the telescope on the vicarage sill, adjusted to your height, not Mr. Clement's. And the biscuit crumb on the hearthrug Marie biscuits are your weakness, not his. She moved to the fireplace. The final thread, the top hat, taken from the Red Lion lost property by Mr. Clement the previous week. He intended it for the Christmas pageant. He left it in the vicarage cloakroom. Miss Hartnell fetched it with the coat. A small detail, but details are the alphabet of truth. Silence stretched, taut as wire. Outside, a branch cracked beneath its load of frost. Inspector Craddock closed his notebook. "Mr. Clement, you will be charged with murder. Miss Hartnell, with being accessory after the fact. Constables." Mr. Clement rose unsteadily. "I have a confession properly written. It is in my desk. Let me fetch it." Craddock nodded to a constable. The man followed the vicar into the hall. A moment later came the sound of a drawer opening, then a single sharp report. Dolly Bantry screamed. Craddock ran. They found Mr. Clement slumped across the desk, a service revolver Colonel Bantry's, borrowed months ago for rat shooting, smoking in his hand. The confession, in neat clerical copperplate, lay beside him. "I cannot face the disgrace. Forgive me, E.C." Miss Hartnell stood motionless, tears cutting channels through the powder on her cheeks. "He was always tidy," she said. The constables led her away. Mr. Dane, who had not spoken, crossed to the window and stared out at the moonlit frost. Harmon followed Miss Marple into the hall. "I owe you my life," he said simply. "You owe it to the truth," she replied. "Go to Dover. Paint your storms. But remember, every canvas begins with a clean brush." She returned to the library. Craddock was sealing the exhibits. "Suicide avoids a trial," he said heavily. "But the evidence is complete." Miss Marple picked up the balaclava. "Justice is never complete, Inspector. Only finished." The fire settled into embers. Outside, the frost held the village in its iron grip, but the air felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from the very rooftops. Secrets, Miss Marple reflected, were like frost patterns, beautiful, intricate, and doomed to vanish with the first ray of honest sun. Chapter 8. The Quiet Thaw. Christmas Eve settled over Willowbrook like a white counterpane drawn up to the chin of a sleeping child. The frost had hardened into a glaze. Every twig, every blade of grass, every iron fence rail was sheathed in crystal. The church bells rang at 6 for the children's carol service, their bronze voices muffled yet clear, traveling across the frozen fields to the manor and the mill and the silent hall. Miss Marple stood at her bedroom window, hands folded over the balaclava she had never posted. The green was empty now, the crater filled in and turfed by the gardener. Only a darker patch of grass betrayed where the snowman had stood. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys, straight as organ pipes. Somewhere a boy whistled, "Good King Wenceslas," off-key but cheerful. Downstairs the Bantrys were preparing for the midnight service. Dolly fluttered in violet velvet, and anxiety about the state of the hot water bottles. Colonel Bantry polished his medals and grumbled that the vicarage choir would be a man short. Miss Marple descended, shawl about her shoulders, and accepted a cup of cocoa from Pauk. "Mr. Harmon left this morning, miss," the butler said, offering a small package. "Asked me to give you this with his compliments." The parcel was light, wrapped in brown paper. Inside lay a sketch charcoal on heavy stock of the mill wheel under frost, the water black and glossy as patent leather. On the reverse, in a hurried scrawl, "For the lady who saw through the storm. J.H." She slipped it into her handbag beside the unused railway. Tickets she had found in Mrs. Dane's handbag and returned to the sender. The hall was shut up, blinds drawn, the great gates chained. Mr. Dane had gone to his sister in Scotland. The servants had been paid off until the will was proved. Gladys, dry-eyed now, had taken a post in the next county. The rose silk tea gown had been burned in the kitchen boiler. Only a handful of ash remained to mingle with the Christmas cinders. At 11, the manor party set out for Church 3 in the dog-cart, the rest on foot, lanterns swinging. The air was so cold it seemed to ring like glass. Breath hung in clouds. Boots crunched in perfect unison. They passed the Red Lion, warm and noisy with last-minute revelers, and the post office, dark and secretive. Mrs. Price watched from her upstairs window. Curtain twitched aside, then let it fall. The church was ablaze with candles. Holly and ivy decked the pews. The crib stood beneath the east window, the plaster baby smiling benignly at the empty place where the vicar should have stood. The curate, young and nervous, read the lessons in a voice that cracked on Emmanuel. Miss Hartnell's banner, Gloria in Excelsis, hung limp above the choir stalls. No one had the heart to remove it. Miss Marple took her seat between Dolly and the colonel. The organ played softly. The familiar words rolled out, and she brought forth her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes. She thought of another wrapping, hurried and desperate, beneath a bowler hat and a carrot nose. She thought of a confession written in copperplate and a single shot that had silenced a lifetime of small deceits. After the blessing, the congregation spilled into the churchyard. Snow began to fall again large, slow flakes that melted on eyelashes and gloved hands. Children caught them on their tongues. The curate shook hands awkwardly with parishioners who would never quite meet his eye again. Colonel Bantry lit his pipe. The match flared, died, flared again. Miss Marple lingered by the lich gate. The newer grave Mr. Clements lay beneath a wreath of laurel from the manor glasshouse. A card in Miss Hartnell's angular script reads simply, "Rest." The earth was already whitening over it. Dr. Haydock joined her, scarf muffled to the ears. Trial set for February. She plead guilty life, most likely. Quiet end to a noisy business. Quiet is what Willowbrook needs, Miss Marple said, and perhaps deserves. They walked back together. The snow thickened, erasing footprints almost before they were made. At the manor, the lights glowed welcoming. Pauk had mulled wine ready, and the Christmas tree twinkled with 100 tiny flames. Later, when the house was still, Miss Marple sat by the dying fire with a final cup of cocoa. She drew out the sketch and propped it on the mantel. The mill wheel looked almost alive, turning slowly in an unfelt current. She thought of storms painted and storms lived, of pearls that had gleamed and now lay locked in a police vault, of a woman who had loved unwisely and a man who had feared disgrace more than death. Outside, the church clock struck 1, then 2. The snow continued to fall, soft and deliberate, covering the village as gently as absolution. Miss Marple set the empty cup aside, gathered her shawl, and went upstairs. In the morning she would pack. The London train left at 10. Before she slept, she opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote, in her neat, slanting hand, "Human nature is like snow pure until trodden upon. Yet even then the marks may be covered and the surface made smooth again. Observation, patience, and a little charity, these are the brooms that sweep the path clear." She closed the book, turned out the lamp, and listened to the hush of the falling snow. Willowbrook slept beneath its new blanket, secrets buried once more, waiting for the distant, inevitable spring.